conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome everybody to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider, and today we've got one heck of a show for you. After all, we have the Louisville abortion clinic set to be demolished, causes for a celebration. We'll go over, how that came to be, and of course, what we need to do moving forward in this state on the subject of abortion. Also, we see that the Democrats have elected their new House leadership. I covered a lot on the Republicans and picking their leaders, and it matters more, obviously, because they are in control by 80% of the House, and so that leadership there really dictates what passes and what doesn't, meaning that the minority caucus decision-making could go one of two ways. It could be about picking who you think can put up the best defense, or it could be about picking who you think will grow your caucus the most, grow more Democrats into more seats. And, the Democrats in the House decided to go ahead with their floor leader, their minority floor leader pick of Representative Pamela Stevenson, that they're clearly into who can make the most amount of noise fighting normal run-of-the-mill legislation that the majority of voters do support. I'll show you evidence of that. Also, we have a bill from 2021, House Bill 439, taking effect that drastically changes how you renew your license. I'll talk about how this bill is perfect evidence for our legislators in general, both Democrat and Republican, don't spend enough time actually talking to everyday Kentuckians about what's most difficult to them about their government, because if they bothered to care about that for 1 second, they would have never voted for this bill. So we're going to go over all that and more today. But first, before I dig down into it, please make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe wherever you're listening to this at. If you're listening to this on the radio or TV, I encourage you to head over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab, see all the other places you can listen to the Andrew Cooperrider Show each and every day. There's more than just one episode a week, of course. So that way you can stay up to date on what's going on right here in Kentucky. And if you are listening to this on a podcasting platform, I encourage you to leave a review. That certainly does help lift us up in the ratings, and it helps us reach more people. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So the Louisville Women's Center, which also is the abortion clinic in Louisville, the last remaining abortion clinic in Kentucky up until the Roe v. Wade was overturned and Kentucky's trigger law went into effect, banning abortions outside of need for life of the mother, is set to be demolished, set to be taken down and destroyed, and something else built in its place, fitting into a place of death and destruction, fitting into something that should have never been a part of our society in the first place. Abortions and killing a baby for just simply convenience. Absolutely horrific. Though it is important that we take this moment not to just celebrate, but to remind us to stay resolved in this fight, because it isn't over yet. We have Republicans in this state. They have an 80-seat majority. They just had now another election cycle, and they lost one person during a primary, but then they gained another person through taking down one of the Democrats. So they've stayed even in the amount of seats, 80-20. Same as they won a few years ago, 2 years ago, and they gained seats then 4 years ago. And I bring this up because at one point, 2 years ago, abortion was literally on the ballot with the abortion amendment here in Kentucky that would have guaranteed in our Constitution that you do not have a right to an abortion, because we do see court challenges. Like right now, we have a new lawsuit coming out of an individual. I believe she is 7 weeks pregnant, 8 weeks pregnant or something like that when she filed this here abortion claim, claiming that she needs to get an abortion, and she's been aggrieved by not being able to do so. Now, what's crazy about this particular story, of course, is that this woman already has children. I do not believe that she's claiming any kind of rape or incest or anything like that. She's certainly not claiming she needs it for the life of the mother. In fact, I would say she probably intends to carry this child all the way through because, and this is the problem with a lot of the abortion cases that they would bring perhaps in the state, the minute that you terminate the pregnancy, your standing to have issue with the law kind of goes away. And because, if you simply travel out of state a few hours and get an abortion, well, your claim of damage is that, well, I couldn't get an abortion, so that damaged me. Well, but you did get one. You were able to get one, so you couldn't be damaged. So what they needed, and this is why it took so long for them to go ahead and find somebody willing to do this case, is they need somebody willing to have the child that would simply be suing to be able to kill children, which is kind of crazy, to say the least, is that you found somebody willing, essentially, and this is how Roe v. Wade, keep in mind, was originally decided. Because you had somebody that went ahead and had the child suing in order to be allowed to kill that child. That means that child will come into this world knowing that their very existence, their mother had such a problem with, that she decided to go ahead and go to the courts to sue and fight for their right to kill that child, stating in writing that they would prefer that that child not exist. And now you're bringing that child into the world. That's truly ghoulish and horrible behavior. That's why it's so hard to find it, because you have to be a literal psychopath to be in that thought process, but yet we see that coming forward. But in order to help fight against that, they had that amendment on the ballot. So you'd think that Republicans would look at this and say, look, since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, we've only gained seats, not lost seats. We literally haven't lost ground at all. We literally still have 80% of the House. We still have the same amount of senators. And we've even been through election cycles where abortion was literally on the ballot. So therefore, we don't need to go backwards on this issue. We can stay right where we're at in Kentucky and say abortion only for in case of the life of the mother. And some would argue, I myself would, that in those cases that really isn't abortion. But regardless, let's not argue semantics at this point. The whole thing here, though, is that the Republicans in leadership and elsewhere believe for some reason that eventually this issue will somehow end the majority. Now, they could believe this because they look at Trump and say how he would for exemptions for life of the mother, rape, and incest, and then also went ahead and said, an easier abortion, maybe 8 weeks or 12 weeks or something like that would be okay. He kind of indicated a little bit, of course, Melania Trump, his wife, writing in her book about abortion, being in favor of it. And so they may look at that and say, look at how well Trump won nationally, kind of going this way with the issue. We need to go this way with the issue in order to maintain it. But truthfully, you don't. Clearly, based upon the results that we've seen in the elections here. I mean, I get it. Bashir talked about abortion for the first time as kind of a statewide candidate in a prior conceived notion that you stay away from guns and babies. And when it comes to Kentucky and running for office, is that you can't be for abortion and you can't be for taking away the guns if you want to win office here in Kentucky. And he won anyways, but it was an off-year election, and there's different aspects, I think, to that election that we have to look at. I've talked about at length on this show. But regardless, we know Republicans are looking at that, and it's important to them to be able to find Republicans that are for exemptions, even some that you would say in leadership that put themselves out there as a God-fearing, God-loving Christian that definitely is really strong on life. Even they are trying to whip up enough votes to get some exemptions passed, showing how afraid they are of this issue. So that's why I think it's important that we remind our Republican legislators that no, you don't need to go backwards on this issue. You have not lost ground yet. There's actually no evidence that you will lose ground on this issue. In fact, to the contrary, based upon the general behavior of our voters and electorate with what's been on the ballot when and how things have gone since Roe v. Wade for the legislature, this is not an issue you need to worry about, but regardless, we'll probably still continue to hear Republicans wringing their old hands concerned about this issue. Well, coming up after this, we will go into the Democrat leadership choices, specifically on Pamela Stevenson chose as minority Florida leader. We'll have that after this short break. Are you a product, service, or business trying to reach conservative Kentuckians? Well, the Andrew Cooperrider Show can be exactly what you're looking for. Unlike anything else out there, the Andrew Cooperrider Show reaches conservative Kentuckians statewide through radio, TV, podcasting, social media, as well as email. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show to see if we have a marketing package that fits your budget. Reach out to the Andrew Cooperrider Show at theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. You can hit the contact tab, or you can also email the Andrew Cooperrider Show at info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Let's be the marketing solution that your business has been looking for. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So Democrats have went ahead and elected their leadership, and there's one particular person that I think is worth bringing up here, and that is who they chose for their minority floor leader, Pamela Stevenson. Now, you may remember Pamela Stevenson as the individual that ran for Attorney General against Russell Coleman and lost. She also is well known for her passionate floor speeches, and by passionate, I mean nonsensical and literally stupid. They make no sense most of the time. Her comments and everything else are absolutely out of control. So for evidence of this, you can just head over to her Wikipedia page where it says she's known for her passionate floor speeches, and they have a quote from one of her speeches here. This dealt with on 2023, there was a bill being passed, I believe it was, Senate Bill 150, being passed through the Senate and the House that banned, and it ended up passing, that banned children from being able to cut off their body parts or take chemical castration drugs or puberty blockers in order to transition their gender. Now, let's keep in mind that this is clearly something that, I think the general consensus is the Republicans are winning on this issue. I mean, we're seeing what's going on nationally, of course, with the Nancy Mace and the whole transgender bathroom situation. And so it's quite clear that this is a winning issue for Republicans. But yet, we see the Democrats still deciding more cowbell. Now, you'd think that after they lost, they would take a good hard look at what they're doing, what they're deciding. I mean, one of the biggest moving ads of the 2024 presidential election was the one where Trump pointed out that Kamala Harris was for they, them, not for you. That this crazy gender whatever is absolutely insane, and it is. You know, the idea that men can become women, women can become men, or vice versa. We all know that's not true. We all know that that's crazy, and we all know, and the general electorate by like large percent, and by we, I mean like literally like 75%, 80% of Americans when polled say that biological men should not be in women's bathrooms and should not be competing against women in sports. So they recognize that there is real biological differences. And a vast majority, the same percentage rate, right around 75 according to polling data, say that children should not be taking life-altering drugs and chopping off their body parts. But yet we see Democrats just saying, more cowbell, we need more of it, instead of learning from that situation. In fact, most Democrats now are saying, look, don't run away from that issue, let's stay with it. In fact, we just saw Bashir saying the same thing on national media here recently. If you listen to the show, you know I covered that. Well, they decided to go ahead and put forward Pamela Stevenson, clearly indicating that they haven't learned their lesson from these crazy, crazy cultural issues that Democrats are really losing on. And we have this quote from her from that bill here. It says, "We've created an environment of hate, and then we look at them like there's something wrong with them. First, you hated black people. Then you hated Jews. Now you're hating everybody. So the question is, when it's the only people left, will you hate yourself?" That quote makes no sense. First, it's historically inaccurate. First you hated black people, now you hate, and then you hated Jews. No. Jews have literally been put upon by society and been hated by society in one form or another for literally thousands of years. In fact, there's a book called the Bible, and Pamela Stevenson's an ordained minister who attends church. So you would hope that she would understand her Bible. And there's stories in there about Jews and being put upon by society, literally thousands of years old, that you must believe is true if you're a Christian, and yet you still think that, first it was blacks, then it was Jews. If anything, if you believe all this to be true and that those people in that room hated blacks and Jews, it would be the other way around. It would be Jews first and then also blacks. And Jews are still hated, so it's going to be black and Jews at the same time. But anyways, putting that to the side. And now you're hating everyone. So when you're the only one left, will you hate yourself? So it's a nonsensical statement. And she yells these things with passion. As evidence of this, I want to play for you her floor speech on the bill last year, 2024, that would have banned DEI departments and teachings of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives within colleges and universities. We're going to split this up into two parts. I'm going to play you the first half. It's about 4 minutes long, give you commentary on it, and then we will come back and talk about the other 4 minutes after this break here, after this segment. But let's go ahead and take a listen to what she said on the floor, and then I'll kind of break it down for you. Let's get into it.
Will the sponsor yield to a question?
She will yield to a question.
This legislation requires that all the universities respond and comply by 30 June 2024. What's the rush to dismantle a service that's primarily trying to build a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive Kentucky? In 2.5 months, you want to dismantle something that's been happening for years.
Lady from Shelby.
The urgency is that what is being prohibited is unconstitutional conduct. It should stop.
Lady from Jefferson, 43.
Will she yield to a second question?
She will yield.
Now, if an institution goes too far, because we've seen the headlines already that DEI is up for elimination, if an institution goes too far and uses this bill as a basis to harm people, deny people their rights, are there any guardrails in this bill to pull them back?
Lady from Shelby.
No, the act speaks for itself as to what should happen. It does not speak to what happens if someone does something else.
Lady from Jefferson.
Will she yield to a third question?
She will yield to another question.
Sponsor, have you spoken to any descendant of slaves that asked you to support this action?
Lady from Shelby.
One of the witnesses last night who did not come but sent her testimony that was read into the record is a descendant of a slave.
Lady from Jefferson.
May I speak on the bill?
Yes, ma'am.
This legislation not only takes the seat away from the table, it's banning the people that make the seats. This bill says that no institution shall spend money to establish or maintain diversity. No institution shall spend money to establish or maintain equity. No institution shall spend money to establish or maintain an inclusive environment. How are we to remedy the policies that were built by our system, that are embedded in our system, from Jim Crow, slavery, and segregation? How are we going to set out to right the wrongs that of the Trail of Tears? How are we going to make sure that every person has the opportunity to reach for the American dream? I've personally spoken, not to just one, but hundreds of people that are actually descendants of slavery. They all want the same thing. They want the promise of America. And many of these, the ones that we don't know their names. There's a project in Louisville called the Unknown Project because we don't know their names. But this is what we know. We know they were harmed by Jim Crow. We know they were spat upon. We know they had no rights. We know they couldn't go to the sheriff's department and file a complaint. We know they didn't get medical care. And they fought anyway so that one day their descendants could have the opportunity for those things. How are we, under the guise of a constitutional problem, which, by the way, the Supreme Court hasn't said was a constitutional problem?
So there you go. She very passionately and loudly started yelling there. But she does start off with a few questions. And it's interesting to me she didn't push back. First, she asked about why is it so urgent that we pass the bill. And when Jennifer Decker, the House carrier of the bill, so when you're in the House or Senate, it's a Senate bill, but you need somebody in the chamber to kind of be the one to answer any questions to the House members if it's a Senate bill. So there's a kind of a co-sponsor that carries the bill in the House or the Senate when it's going one way or the other. But anyways, she asks, what's the hurry here? And Jennifer Decker responds by saying, look, the Supreme Court has ruled that this is unconstitutional conduct. And she responds, now she doesn't respond this time, but you'll hear in the next segment, she ends up coming back around to it and just kind of says a quick line about how that's not what the Supreme Court said, which is inaccurate, of course, but she's a lawyer. Keep this in mind. She has her JD. She ran for Attorney General. So you'd think that if somebody says, well, because it's unconstitutional behavior, she would have more of an argument back to her, but she doesn't want to get a debate on the issue because she knows she's wrong. And as I said, we have evidence of this because there was a bill passed after this that took away the quotas that colleges and universities here in Kentucky were forced to maintain if they wanted to go ahead and receive funding or certain levels of funding from our Council on Post-Secondary Education, government funding. And so they passed a law saying you can't have those racial quotas anymore. And Beshear didn't veto that. In fact, Democrats voted for it as well because the Supreme Court has said that you cannot be bringing in people based on racial quotas. And that's part of what this bill was about. And so she argues it's not unconstitutional, but then ends up acknowledging that in another bill she passes, just goes to show how performative this all is. And then she talks about, well, is there anything in this bill to pull people back if they go too far and they end up discriminating again? Which is also a stupid comment. You're a lawyer. You should know how these things work. You should know there's already laws on the books to stop that discrimination. It's called the Civil Rights Law. And this does nothing to deal with the civil rights. This is talking about diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives that say you're going to give preferential treatment to people and admissions and bring them into your colleges and universities and spend money recruiting based upon their skin color. Clearly wrong thing to do. And then she asks if Jennifer Decker has talked to any descendant of slaves. Jennifer Decker says yes. She doesn't really have a comment back. And then she goes into talking about Jim Crow laws and how people have been harmed by that. But there's some timing issues here that she's having as she discusses that. So we'll go over that and then the rest of her speech and talks about her grandmother Lucy after this short break. Listen up, my fellow business owners, because I got to tell you about a business that's incredibly important to any company's operations, and that's Amston, A-M-P-S-T-U-N, Amston. It's out of Richmond, Kentucky, and they provide cybersecurity for commercial businesses, and they've got dozens of years of experience working with government and private entities alike. So reach out to Amston today. That's AMPSTUN.com, AMPSTUN, Amston. Reach out to them today. Tell them Andrew sent you over. And you're back on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I've been digging into Pamela Stevenson's behavior this past session because she's been now elected as the Democrats' minority caucus floor leader to lead the Democrats on the floor. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, you know, Democrats have choices as what they can do. They can either continue down the path of going ahead and pushing on these issues that they're losing on, or they could become more moderate and potentially gain back ground. Democrats in Kentucky have apparently decided more cowbell. We're going to continue down this path that is clearly losing us in states like Kentucky, but losing us even nationally now as well. We've been going into her floor speech, and we played the first 4 minutes, and towards the end there, she started talking about Jim Crow, that the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within these colleges and universities is to right the wrongs done by Jim Crow. The thing about Jim Crow is the Civil Rights Act passed in 1965. So Jim Crow laws ended some time ago, 60 years ago to be precise. And yet she still says that these DEI initiatives, which didn't even start really, where they started heavily pushing this and going after this real heavily, till maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago or so. So there's a 40-year gap, but somehow it's super important. And yet here now Pamela Stevenson goes into a story where if she could critically think for 1 second, I never know how she won any court cases, but if she could critically think for 1 second, she would realize how this point she's making here completely blow her entire argument out of the water. Because what she has claimed coming into this is that the DEI initiatives in these colleges and universities where they are giving preferential treatment to people based on their skin color is in order to fix these historic wrongs. And if we don't fix them now, minorities, black people, in this case she's talking about black people because she's black, will never succeed. And so she tells a story to point to why she fights so hard, a story that I think truly points to how wrong she is. So let's go ahead and take a listen to her last 4 minutes she had to say on the floor, and we'll come right back to kind of go over what she had to say. Let's take a listen.
Lucy had no rights. She was born in the early 1900s. Dropped out of the 6th grade, had 15 kids. She couldn't go file a police report when her oldest son was killed by someone. She couldn't go to school. She had no rights. But Lucy had a dream that one day, someday, that her grandkids could go to college. So she found a way to save 10 cents a month to get an insurance policy for the promise of America. And when I turned 18, the insurance company gave me the policy because Lucy was my grandmother. She dreamed a world for me that she didn't have in her life. She was willing to suffer and die so that one day her granddaughter could do something. And you all know people like that. And if you don't, I know every person of color, every immigrant knows someone that has gone through that. I'm speaking for the Lucys of this world, the unknown people that can't be in these chambers, and you want to take everything that they died for because you got some little special pet project. It's not who we say we are. No, I know. Soldiers don't get emotional, Marines do. But I am counting on the goodness of Kentuckians that all they want is for their families to thrive and for this body to do what's right, what's good, what's just. Now, I know that we want to follow the Tennessee plan of tax plan, but I hope we don't follow the Tennessee silence plan. See, colleagues and Mr. Speaker, I speak for the people that can't speak for themselves. I'm not a mean person by nature. I just am passionate, and I want every voice to be heard. So if I get thrown off this floor as I've been threatened, because I'm so passionate about these things, then I will be suspended from this floor for my Lucy. And I will be suspended for every person that suffered under the guise of racism, sexism, and all the isms, and they had nowhere to go. Silence is not democracy.
Okay, so there she goes. She tells a story there at the beginning of Lucy, who is her grandmother. Lucy was born 120 years ago. She mentions that Lucy died, I believe she said, at the age of 45. So that means she would have passed away about 75 years ago. And she tells the story about how Lucy fought to give a future to her kids that she wouldn't have, and she purchased these insurance policies. And then it was that insurance policy that allowed Pamela Stevenson herself to be able to attend college. Now, the thing about this whole story, she's arguing about a bill that is banning initiatives that really became more prominent over the last 10 to 20 years in our colleges and universities. And she's defending that these policies need to be in place because, Black Americans cannot get the American dream because of historical racism. But yet she tells a story of a woman working very hard in America to raise herself out of the social position she's been put in, and to also offer opportunities to her children and grandchildren in the future. And then Pamela Stevenson becomes the beneficiary of that behavior and is able to attend college and is now, at 65 years old, an elected House representative. And let's not forget that she was a colonel in the Air Force as a JAG officer for decades. Truly, I mean, by any stretch of the imagination, on paper, you'd say, what a successful story. Pamela Stevenson, 65 years old. She would have went to college about 45 years ago then. Before these DEI initiatives. You know, right around, she was born, she's 65, so she would have been born right around the same time that these Jim Crow ended, when she was about 5 years old, right? So you'd say that would not that point to how these initiatives aren't needed? Wouldn't that point to the fact, I mean, her entire argument is we must have these DEI initiatives because minorities, specifically in this case, she's talking about Black Americans are unable to obtain the American dream. But here she is telling a story about a woman 120 years ago being born that ended up working hard against all odds and was able to afford a life to her kids and her grandkids and an opportunity she didn't have. That now her grandkid, because of the hard work she did, was able to go to college, was able to become a colonel in the Air Force, and is now an elected representative here in Kentucky. That sounds like the American dream to me, and all of that was achieved without these DEI initiatives being in place. But yet, Pamela Stevenson says we can't take this racial behavior away. Black people will be unable to achieve anything. She literally is arguing against her own point. Now, of course, she has to, because this victim mentality she's attached to. She needs to be on a victim in order to be yelling passionately about something. She needs to fight against something. And when she gets up there and yells, she says nonsensical things. I read to you the quote that she said about the bill banning kids from permanently altering their bodies because they are mentally ill and think they have a different gender. She needs to fight and yell. And, it goes into the story about, a hero slays a dragon and gets applauded, and then there's nothing that's quite out there like a dragon, so they end up fighting lesser and lesser and lesser things, trying to make a bigger and bigger deal about it in order to grab that same fame and attention, and then they end up swinging at nothing and demanding people pay attention. And that's where the Democrat Party is now. That's why they keep losing. They're swinging at nothing, things we know intrinsically are not true anymore. We know that the American dream is just as attainable for anybody in America, regardless of who you were born as. We know that you can work hard and make it, at least we hope so. The biggest problem we have now is our government getting in the way, and we're recognizing that. That's why Trump was elected. That's why Republicans are winning on a promise to shrink government. Now, if only they would do it, but yet we have evidence from Republicans in the state that they will not follow through on that mandate. And we have evidence of this by a bill taking effect this year. We'll talk about after this short break.
Lexington Overstock Warehouse is Central Kentucky's best source for stylish new home furnishings. Don't pay retail. With our low overhead operating structure and big name brands, we offer the absolute best values on new furniture for every room. Shop online anytime at LexingtonOverstockWarehouse.com or visit our weekends only showroom located at 156 West Tiverton Way. Right now, for listeners of this show, we're offering a special discount for our online customers. Use coupon code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your online order today. Lexington Overstock Warehouse, low overhead equals really low prices.
As I mentioned in my last segment, the Republicans are getting elected because people are recognizing, truthfully, of all creed, color, belief system, that the biggest inhibitor to them succeeding is not their skin color. It's not their immigration status as far as if they're first generation immigrant, second generation immigrant, or what have you. It's not even where they live. It's not whether or not their parents were rich or not. They're recognizing the biggest inhibitor to them succeeding, the thing that's holding them back the most, is the government. And for quite some time, Republicans have been the party, at least claiming to be the party of smaller government, of getting government out of the way, of deregulation. And that's what Americans are voting for. They want somebody to stop holding them back from succeeding. You know, Democrats push out this belief that, well, if we just need to campaign more on promising jobs and all these things to Americans, and that's how we win. We talk about things they care about. But what they're failing to understand is that, you know, Americans don't want the government to pay for their daycare. They don't want the government to hand them a job. They don't want the government to do these things and spend their money on these altruistic ideas that they supposedly have. They want to be able to provide for themselves. They don't want to have to ask the government to give them a subsidy to take their kids to daycare. They want to be able to raise their kids based upon the money that they make themselves with help from nobody else. We are independent people. That's our human nature. We want to be independent. We want to be free to make our own decisions and free from relying on anybody else. We want to be masters of our own destiny. That's why Republicans get elected. But yet, we have Republicans in the state that insist on not only taking our money and reshuffling it off, sucking away at the taxpayer until there's nothing left, sucking away at their paychecks till they can't afford to live anymore. But we also have Republicans putting forward legislation that truthfully ends up causing us quite a lot of headache. And we need to look at a law coming into effect that now in Kentucky, in order to renew your license, you have to get an eye exam. Now, maybe you're somebody who sits there and says, you know, I think this is a good idea that we had to get an eye exam. And, you know, certainly as you get older too as well, going ahead and getting an eye exam would probably be helpful for you to renew your license. And there's already some requirements here in Kentucky that there'd be some vision, looking at vision as you get older. But now everybody is required when they renew their license to get a vision test. Now, there's been a law like this in effect for some time, I believe, in Ohio, where people have had to go and get their vision tested when they want to get a license. And there's plenty of stories in Ohio, and you can read about this if you want to, of individuals that, for one reason or another, were somehow failed in their vision tests by the vision doctors or what have you, and then going ahead and taking away their license over it, and then that individual had to go to court to get that overturned, to prove that they could in fact see. That could be a real death blow to your life if you're an individual living in a rural area and you have to drive to work. And what's crazy is that maybe you think this is a big problem, this is a big issue. Well, the thing is that when you look at the list of reasons for traffic fatalities and accidents, a person being unable to see and it not being caught by medical reasons is literally like 10th on the list. After things like distracted driving, driving under the influence. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of issues that cause most of our accidents, to where the amount of accidents saved by people not being able to see, by making them get an eye exam, is minuscule. But let's say you decide, no, everybody does need to get an eye exam. I mean, they've had this law in Ohio, it makes sense. But this is proof that these individuals that are mandating this, these legislators are not dealing enough with their constituents, or they would have never voted for this. In fact, only 5 legislators didn't vote for this back when it came up for a vote in 2021. And this is why it's such a big problem, specifically here in Kentucky, and it has to do with these regional driver's license centers. So right now, if you want to renew your license, you don't necessarily have to go into these driver's license centers that are horribly run. And by evidence of this, go on right now, if you could, and try to schedule an appointment in order to take a driver's test, because that's something you have to actually do at the office. If you want to get your kid a license, you want to get a motorcycle's license, some other reason you need to go in there to get a license of some sort. And what you'll find is there's nothing available. In fact, if you live in Lexington or Louisville or any of these other major cities and you want to get that test done, what you have to do is wake up every morning at 6 a.m. and hope to beat everybody else trying to get a slot, in order to beat them up, in order to schedule your own slot for 3 weeks out. So they only schedule 3 weeks out of time, and a new day becomes available every weekday at like 6 a.m. So you got to wake up at 6 a.m. and try to grab that spot. Or you can schedule one and have to drive hours away. And then if you go out into these rural areas, they're driving hours away. So if you want to, now if you need to renew your license, you're able to do it online right now and have it sent to you. You can still do it online with this law in place, but you now have to go pay an eye doctor to get an eye exam, which costs, $50, $60, depending on everything going into it, to get an eye exam to submit then with your online renewal application. Now, maybe you don't have $60, or maybe you don't want to spend that money. Well, now you have to, if you don't want to spend that, go to the driver's license centers and they'll give you the eye exam. So you've just forced a bunch of Kentuckians to now show up in person to an already broken system. A system that does not work now. And so I would argue to you, if you are somebody who says, I'm for making every driver when they renew their license take an eye exam, okay, fine. You're ignoring the data on whether or not that's a big problem. And, you're pushing forward a kind of government nanny state to a degree when it's unnecessary for most people, because either you can see or you can't. Like, most people would go to an eye doctor if they can't see naturally on their own. There's not a whole lot of people out there that are driving around unable to. It's so minuscule when you think about it, because just think about the psychology here, right? You can't see. Driving is the least of your concerns, being able to read and see things far away and work in general. And I'm saying this as somebody who has glasses. You would go to the eye doctor to get glasses yourself. And if you need corrective lenses to see and drive, well, you already know that. But of course, they think that people would, ignore the fact they can't see well and go ahead and drive anyways. And so, because of that, we've just further either got to pay now $60 more ish, if not more, to get an eye exam if you want to do your renewal online. Or you got to go drive hours away and wait in line and already complicate an already broken system. So what they should have done, if you want to put this in place, is maybe take on these regional driver's license issues to begin with. Maybe you should have fixed this system as it sits now, before you throw more problems into it. But that's not how our Republicans are thinking. No, this is an exact kind of bill that gets passed by a lobby, that gets passed by, in this case, a medical lobby, an eye doctor lobby, that said, how do eye doctors make more money? I know there's this incredibly awful to work system that nobody realistically can deal with because it involves you going hours away or waiting for hours a day. And people like doing it online. Well, what if we mandated that if you want that ease of access, you don't have to pay $60 to this private physician over here in order to renew your license online? We could really make some big bang on our buck. And so they come in, they pass it, and of course legislators think to themselves, what am I going to do? Stand up here and vote no on a bill that says you have to see to drive? Geez. I'd be worried about that. I'm worried about it. And so that's how we end up in this position. They don't think through anything they see. Now the good news is that if this same vote took place this year on this same bill, I do not believe only 5 people would vote no. I think more like 10 to 15 would vote no. Because we do have more legislators now realizing what's going on. In fact, some legislators that voted yes on this bill would probably wish they could go back and vote no. And I think there's plenty of legislators that have come in and replaced those who voted yes, such as people like Sal Santoro, replaced by Steve Doan, or Ed Massey, which is now T.J. Roberts. Or you have Adam Koenig. Adam Koenig was replaced by Steve Doan. Sal Santoro was replaced by Marion Proctor. But anyways, those are 3 yeses that would now be no's, I do believe. You have other people. I think somebody like Kim Holloway coming in would have voted no. And so now that would be a no. That was priorly Heath, a yes. So that kind of gives you some ideas that we are able to push forward, and we're putting better Republicans in place that wouldn't vote for this kind of garbage, but it takes more hard work. And it takes you paying attention to what's going on and letting others know exactly how to make these changes. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today. We'll see you back here later this week. Hope you have a great rest of your day.